Attention, duped masses!
You're listening to Media Monarchy with James Evan Pilato.
Tracking phones, losing domains, and giving them the FingerPay. Plus this day in history with the nuclear Cold War, false alarm, and our song of the day by Braun on your Morning Monarchy for September 26, 2017. I'm James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com. Welcome to wherever you are. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. We are streaming live, MediaMonarchy.com/listen, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 Pacific time. And it is Tuesday. Some folks call it a Tech Tuesday. We like to call it #CyberSpaceWar. And all the stories you're going to hear over the next hour, you can find at the top of the tweets. We share all the stories an hour before showtime. You can also find the invite to the chat. We chat in Discord where you can also listen to the show. So multiple ways for you to be able to listen to the show. Hit that link, open up your VLC, iTunes, media player of choice. And we appreciate you hanging out in the chat. That's how we learn a lot of things, being together, asking questions. So I'm not only crowdsourced, but I'm also crowdfunded. We are brought to you by you. MediaMonarchy.com/support has the PayPal, the Patreon, the Bitcoin, and the post office box. And a huge thanks, huge thanks to our latest patron, Sanjin D. They went to patreon.com/MediaMonarchy and signed up to give us that little bit of monthly support that we need to keep going and growing and moving and grooving. We are 12 plus years into Media Monarchy and 2 plus years into quitting our commercial FM radio job because we want to work for you. And before we dive into all the cyberspace war news, let's glance at the breaking lamestream news, see if we can fix anything. Obamacare repeal appears dead, ... again. And the NFL couldn't keep Colin Kaepernick off the field, of course, with the fantastic convergence of two of my favorite things, sports and politics. Equifax CEO steps down after data breach, but don't worry, he'll still get an $18 million pension. The Beeb asking the musical question, does Trump care about Puerto Rico's hurricane victims? At least 6 White House advisors used private email accounts. Shocker. And Otto Warmbier's parents lash out. North Korea is not a victim. They're terrorists. Meanwhile, Macron lays out vision of a Europe fitter for globalized world. That's a hilarious headline there, Bloomberg. You should have just said fitter, happier. And Uber to withdraw from Canada's Quebec province. We've got, of course, stories about Uber in the first few minutes of this Cyberspace War episode. But, of course, couple other news stories on your side bit. Follow us under #PeakPortland. Driver hits hot tub, crashes into cop car, ditches SUV in thicket of blackberry bushes, police say. And the flip side of that is man who threw flare into cop car during May Day protests just got 5 years in prison. So that's your lamestream news. We always like to bring you a little bit of that at the top of these episodes, and we will dive into our cyberspace war news. That's Tuesday, Tech Tuesday, inner space and outer space. So-called law enforcement use of one tracking tool, the Cell Site Simulator. And we've talked about these a lot. They can sometimes be called Stingrays. They can sometimes be called, was it Emery? Cell Site Simulators to track a suspect's phone, Freudian slip. They need to track down a warrant because they never used them. Law enforcement use of one tracking tool, the Cell Site Simulator to track a suspect's phone without a warrant, violates the Constitution, the D.C. Court of Appeals said last Thursday in a landmark ruling for privacy and Fourth Amendment rights as they pertain to policing tactics. The ruling could have broad implications for law enforcement's use of cell site simulators, which local cops and feds can use to mimic a cell phone tower so the phone connect to the device instead of its regular network. You're tricking phones. In a decision that reversed the decision of the Supreme Court of the District of Columbia and overturned the conviction of a robbery and sexual assault suspect, the D.C. Court of Appeals determined the use of Cell Site Simulator to locate a person through his or her cell phone invades the person's actual legitimate and reasonable expectation of privacy in his or her location information and is a search. The Fourth Amendment guarantees, quote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants, capitalized, shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Good job, CBS. They included the full wording of the Fourth Amendment. D.C. Metropolitan Police's use of such cell site simulator technology to nab suspect Prince Jones in 2013 violated the Fourth Amendment. The court decided against the U.S. government last Thursday. We thus conclude Under ordinary circumstances, the use of a cell site simulator to locate a person through his or her cell phone invades the person's actual legitimate and reasonable expectation of privacy in his or her location information, and that's a search. The government's argument to the contrary is unpersuasive. Now we can glance for some comments in the chat. Hell, they can enter and search any home without a warrant now. And yeah, how about all the times when of course, the cops tip off the media that, hey, we're going to go ransack this house. You guys want to come along? Sure. Can we dig through the suspect's dresser? And it is also possibly the trick has been to lower everyone's reasonable expectation of privacy to zero. So they could still abide by the letter of the law if everyone's perception of privacy is nil. A December 2016 report from the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee found U.S. taxpayers, spent $95 million on 434 cell site simulator devices between 2010 and 2014. Did you know that you bought those? I don't remember getting the receipt for those. Oh, probably because I don't know if I paid my thefts for those. The price tag for a single device hovering around $500,000. While law enforcement agencies should be able to utilize technology as a tool to help officers be safe and accomplish their missions, absent proper oversight and safeguards, the domestic use of cell site simulators may well infringe upon the constitutional rights of citizens to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, as well as the right to free association. We would argue that this country is going through a massive seizure. Under former criminal attorney general Eric Holder, Fast and Furious Holder, under some pressure from Congress critters, the so-called Department of Justice in 2015 issued a policy that federal authorities could only use cell site simulators with a warrant. But that policy was never inked into law, and policies can change. Former criminal attorney general Jeff Sessions' tough-on-crime stance has worried some privacy advocates as to how he might use tools like cell site simulators. So perhaps some not unmitigated good news to begin our cyberspace war episode? Telling people about that pesky Fourth Amendment. You are listening to Your Morning Monarchy, and that's how we begin. A little bit of good news under hashtag cyberspace war. Yeah, thanks, Obama. There's a book coming out called Thanks, Obama. Of course there is. Meanwhile, in past skirmishes with local regulators, Uber's playbook under co-founder and the now ousted CEO Travis Kalanick, it was simple. Fight, fight, fight. Now, as a brand new face, CEO Dara Khosrowshahi. Dara K is the new CEO of Uber, in case you haven't heard, deals with a stunning rebuke from London. And now their playbook gets another page. Fight, but maybe offer some diplomatic humility on Friday. As many things did happen this past Friday, just hours after Greater London's transport authorities decided not to renew Uber's operating license, citing a lack of corporate responsibility. Uber wound up for its first punch. Almost reflexively, it followed its familiar tactic of recruiting its mass rider base for help, starting an online petition drive to pressure regulators that has now more than 770,000 signatures at the time of the publishing of this Associated Press article. It also promised appeals and defiantly accused regulators of caving to the taxi industrial complex. Then Dara K, took to Twitter, quote, "Dear London, we are far from perfect. Please work with us to make things right."
It's 5 years since Uber first launched its app in London, and in that time it's made its fair share of both enemies and friends. But today, Transport for London announced that it would not be renewing Uber's license to operate in the city at the end of this month. In a statement, they said the company was not fit and proper to hold a license and had demonstrated a lack of corporate responsibility. TfL's concerns relate to four main areas. Uber's approach to the reporting of serious criminal offences, such as sexual assaults by its drivers, for which it's been criticised by the Metropolitan Police, the way the company performs background checks on its drivers, and the way it obtains medical certificates. Finally, TfL raised concerns about Uber's use of a controversial piece of software known as Greyball, which critics have argued has allowed Uber to avoid law enforcement and sting operations on its drivers.
Well, I think this is a courageous decision by Transport for London because for some time now, serious concerns have been raised about Uber's business practices, and I think the evidence has built up over a considerable period of time now to show that Uber is an unfit and improper regulator.
Uber claims to have 3.5 million users in London, but immediate concerns are for its thousands of drivers.
It's a devastating decision. There's 120,000 private hire drivers in London. More than doubled that number has been in the last 5 years. All of those people are now facing unemployment and, worse than that, debt associated with commercial vehicle loans that they've taken out to go and work for Uber.
For its part, Uber denies all of the allegations made in TfL's announcement and said it will immediately appeal the decision. Crucially, the company will retain the right to operate during the appeals process, which could take many months. So serial users of the app shouldn't fret about their morning commute quite yet.
Cracking down on the gig economy. And isn't that always the way anytime people want to go outside the set parameters? You're going to get smacked down. Oh, you want to be a weirdo and live on your own with who knows what they're doing with those kids? Oh, and you might have a gun, so we're going to have to murder your family and burn your place down. What? You think you're going to make drugs yourself in your kitchen with detergent and a bunch of terrible shit? I'm sorry. We're going to have to crack down hardcore on that. You may only use the drugs that we bring into the country for you. Now, I'm not trying to say necessarily that Uber is either like a militia or what I've been saying is the same thing I've been saying. It's not about Uber, just like it's not about Napster or any of the other platforms. It's about the idea. And that idea is toothpaste that's all out of the tube and it ain't going back in. They're just trying to figure out how to damage control it all. So whether you're talking about upstart third-party taxi companies or America's next top president, toothpaste is out of the tube and they're working to figure out what to do with it. So it's a pretty easy transition from Uber to Dubai. They staged a test flight yesterday for what it said would soon be the world's first drone taxi service under an ambitious plan by the United Arab Emirates city to lead the Arab world in innovation. The flying taxi, developed by German drone firm Volocopter, resembles a small two-seater helicopter. It's pretty much a helicopter with 4 turbines. Cabin topped with a wide hoop studded with 18 propellers. It was unmanned for its maiden test run in a ceremony arranged for Dubai Crown Prince Sheikh Hamdan bin Mohammed. Meant to fly without remote control guidance and with a maximum flight duration of 30 minutes. And then you turn into a pumpkin, I guess. Comes with plenty of fail-safes in case of trouble, backup batteries, rotors, and for a worst-case scenario, a couple of parachutes. Volocopter is in a race with more than a dozen well-funded European and U.S. firms, each with its own science fiction-inspired vision for creating a new form of urban transport that's a cross between a driverless electric car and a short-haul vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. These include aerospace giant Airbus, which aims to put a self-piloting taxi in the air by 2020, Kitty Hawk, a company backed by Google co-founder Larry Page, and of course Uber, which is working with partners on its own flying taxi strategy. That's funny. Bongo in the chat essentially says the same thing that Nicole said when she tweeted this story. What could possibly go wrong? Implementation would see you using your smartphone, having an app, and ordering a blank. You could pretty much stop at the sentence there. Implementation of all of this, Brave New World Order, requires you to have a smartphone on your person at all times. Now, what were we joking about in the chat yesterday? Our buddy Head in a Jar sometimes has to miss these media monarchies because stupid boss schedules meetings in the middle. One of his coworkers was talking about, oh, I might not get my health and wellness credits with the company because something happened with the app and essentially the data was lost. You know, all the companies now have all rolled out their, of course, wellness operations because they're getting massive grant money from the disease industry and the pharma industrial complex. And of course, it's all about all your data. You think Apple and Google are really into selling you phones? I think they're really into gobbling up all your biometrics so they can sell it. She couldn't wear her tracking device while swimming. The swimming, of course, would also get you some points on the wellness program. Head basically joked with her in the meeting, oh yeah, that's a big problem, except that won't happen anymore once you get chipped. Everybody kind of somewhat uncomfortably laughs, but you ain't joking. Implementation would see you using your smartphone, having an app, and ordering a Volocopter to the next Voloport near you. Coming to a Voloport near you. The Volocopter would come and autonomously pick you up and take you to your destination, CEO Florian Reuter said. And we are getting this news story from Reuters, appropriately enough. And remember, everything we say and play will always be included in the show notes. It's capable of flying based on GPS tracks today, and we will implement full sense capability, also dealing with unknown obstacles on the way, he said, noting that developers aim to initiate the taxis within 5 years. In Monday's test flight, the device hovered upward about 200 meters in word for about 5 minutes over a windswept patch of sand astride the Emirates Gulf Coast. Attired in crisp, wow, this is getting really flowery. Attired in crisp white robes and headdresses, Sheikh Hamdan and his entourage clapped approvingly from a nearby viewing deck as the craft alighted. Yeah, they saved all their fancy English for the end of the article, or their Reuters editors wouldn't mind so much. The UAE is sought to distinguish itself in a region mired in war and strife as a high-tech, forward-looking society that wears caveman robes and beats their women. It plans to send an unmanned probe to Mars by 2021, the Arab world's first mission to space, and Dubai has in many ways led their showy march into the future by introducing the region's first driverless metro and robot policeman prototypes, all of which we have reported for you. Encouraging innovation and adopting the latest technologies contributes not only to the country's development, but also builds bridges into the future. Dubai starts testing taxis, flying taxis. And I think pretty good idea that the photos, as we were just going through the flowery language right there, the photos that accompany this story are pretty fantastic, because it is the guys in their flowering, flowing white robes next to space copters. They're wearing their little sandals, and it's good stuff. Good, funny stuff. That's probably going to be the album art for this episode. You know, sometimes we've got our friends like Citizens Gateway that makes album art for our episodes. Each and every episode gets its own artwork that we put together. Sometimes it's just a stunning photo that I brand with the Media Monarchy banner. However, sometimes, like our friends, Citizens Gateway, makes a cool little montage, collage, that incorporates some of the several stories we might talk about on an episode, as opposed to having just a one-picture album art. If you're into that and you're available at around this time each and every day, could totally help us out making album art. You can always hit me up, james@MediaMonarchy.com. We are streaming live at MediaMonarchy.com/listen. Would love it if you told a friend. We've been doing this for a long time, and I think you can tell the proof is in our pudding. Delicious truth pudding. Let's continue looking at hashtag cyberspace war, my friends, as we look at inner space and outer space. The Financial Services Agency, FSA, if you're nasty, will put virtual currency exchanges operating in China, or no, I'm sorry. Whew, wrong country. This is from the Japan Times. And we're actually grabbing this from the Japan Times, so interestingly enough, it makes no reference of saying in Japan, because they just know that they're talking about there. The Financial Services Agency will put virtual currency exchanges operating in Japan under full surveillance starting in October. The FSA will monitor whether the exchanges for Bitcoin and other digital currencies have appropriate internal systems, including ones to protect customer assets. If necessary, the agency will carry out on-site inspections. Virtual currencies have led to the creation of innovative services thanks to their low settlement and remittance costs, while they've been used in crimes such as fraud and money laundering. Because it's the only currency that's used for fraud and money laundering. We pursue both market fostering and regulation enforcement, an FSA executive said. We aim for sound market development. Virtual currencies can be bought and sold on exchanges run by private companies. Pundits say there are more than 20 such exchanges in Japan. Do you need pundits to tell you that? Pundits usually tell you theories and interpretations. 20 exchanges in Japan seems like a fairly solid brick and mortar kind of thing. All digital currency exchanges operating in Japan are required to register with the authorities by the end of September. So you've got about 4 days, buddy. Under the revised payment services law that went into effect back in April. Now, I believe we've made reference to the cryptocurrency actions going on, of course, not only in China, but also in Japan on latest episodes of New World Next Week. Last month, the FSA established a 30-strong surveillance team, including agency and local finance bureau officials with relevant expertise. The team is checking whether virtual currency exchanges manage customer assets separately from their own assets and whether they have appropriate risk management measures, including how to respond to cyber attacks, in place. Because they care about you. They want to make sure that your cryptocurrency transactions are, have appropriate risk management measures because they're very concerned about your risks. Among major virtual currencies, Bitcoin has seen its price seesaw, soaring 4 to 5 times from the start of the year before taking a sharp downturn. Some companies have raised funds using such currencies in so-called initial coin offerings, the ICO. But there have been cases in which the novel fundraising method was abused by fraudsters. So just in case you weren't getting the message, cryptocurrencies are bad and only used by money laundering, child molesting, drug abusing criminals. I say drugs twice. And everybody that uses the official fiat currency, you're all above board and you're good. So again, don't think that you're going to invent your own thing and sidestep our entire system. We've got massive tolls set up, literally and figuratively. And another day, another hacking. The Guardian has reported that in the latest corporate cyber breach, one of the world's big 4 accounting and consultancy firms, Deloitte? Do we pronounce it out like Deloitte? They don't say like Deloitte, do they? Deloitte. Not super familiar with their big accounting and consultancy firm. Deloitte was targeted by a sophisticated hack that compromised the confidential emails and plans of some of its blue-chip clients, and just like Equifax, New York headquartered Deloitte was a similar victim of a cybersecurity attack that went unnoticed for months. Now, remember, it's not necessarily that it's gone unnoticed, it's that it goes unreported for months. And that's still coming out about Equifax. Oh yeah, we knew about it probably for like 4 months, and then all our high-up guys dumped all their stock, and then we told you suckers about it. The Guardian understands Deloitte discovered the hack in March of this year, but it's believed the hackers may have had access to the systems since October or November before that, back in 2016. Responding to questions from The Guardian, Deloitte confirmed it had been the victim of a hack, but insisted only a small number of its clients had been impacted. It would not be drawn on how many of its clients had data made potentially vulnerable by the breach. Alas, the company has yet to provide a full disclosure of just who and which clients were violated. An estimated 5 million emails were in the hacked email cloud and could have been accessed by the hackers. Deloitte said the number of emails that were at risk was a fraction of this number, but declined to elaborate. While unlike Equifax, Deloitte is not a public company and is not accountable to countless shareholders. With $37 billion in revenue last year and over 263,000 worldwide employees, Deloitte is a corporate behemoth which provides auditing, tax consultancy, and like Equifax, high-end cybersecurity advice to some of the world's biggest banks. That's, again, like nurses who smoke offering health advice to you. Multinational companies, media enterprises, pharmaceutical firms, and government agencies. The Guardian reports that Deloitte clients across all of these sectors had material in the company email system that was breached. The companies include household names as well as U.S. government departments. So far, 6 of Deloitte's clients have been told their information was impacted by the hack. Deloitte's internal review into the incident is, of course, ongoing. The hacker compromised the firm's global email server through an administrator's account that, in theory, gave them privileged, unrestricted access to all areas. Now, all access. Embarrassingly, the administrator-level hack required only a single password and didn't have two-step verification, much like Deloitte and other companies strongly urge everyone else to do. As the Krebs on Security blog separately notes, according to a source close to the investigation, the breach dates back to at least the fall of 2016 and involves the compromise of all administrator accounts at the company, as well as Deloitte's entire email system. I think it's unfortunate how we've handled this and swept it under the rug. It wasn't a small amount of emails like reported. They accessed the entire email database and all admin accounts. But we never notified our advisory clients of our cyber intel clients. What? The source further said that the hackers had free reign in the network for a long time and that the company still doesn't know exactly how much total data was stolen. Penetrating the unknown number of emails involved breaching the Microsoft cloud by using the company. That's how that works. Emails to and from Deloitte's 244,000 staff were stored in the Azure cloud service, which was provided by Microsoft. That's Microsoft's equivalent to the Amazon Web Services and Google's cloud platform, because not only do they, of course, offer you bells and whistles, they bought up the real estate on the fucking internet that we all put our sites on. Now, I'm not using Amazon Web Services or Microsoft's cloud or Google's cloud. But do I know that my provider and server company isn't using those? No. That's why I would pretty much prefer, and this is all a part of the slow and steady work behind the scenes, pretty much just want to have all the stuff myself. I'd be fine to just have a RAID rack here in the studio, and that's where my server is, that's where the website is, and I run it, and I control it, and I literally have it in my hands. Same thing I feel about all kinds of records. You think I'm going to trust my 40-year-long record collecting life to Spotify? Hell no. I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com. You are listening to your Morning Monarchy for Tuesday, September 26th, 2017, and it is a Technology Tuesday. Each and every Tuesday, hashtag Cyber Space War. So we'll jump from the new news on Deloitte to some new news about the older hack at CCleaner. TechDirt is reporting CCleaner hack may have been a state-sponsored attack on 18 major tech companies. At the beginning of this week, reports emerged that Avast, owner of the popular CCleaner software, of course, had been hacked. Now we're going back to last week. So this article originally published Thursday, September 21st. Initial investigations by security researchers at Cisco Talos discovered that the intruder not only compromised Avast's servers, but managed to embed both a backdoor and a multi-stage malware payload that rode on top of the installation of CCleaner. That infected software, traditionally designed to help scrub PCs of cookies and other tracking software and malware, was subsequently distributed by Avast to 700,000 customers. Initially, they said that number was 2.27 million. And while all of that's notably terrible, it appears initial reports dramatically understated both the scope and damage done by the hack. The air at CCleaner is safe to breathe. Initially, news reports and statements by Avast insisted that the hackers weren't able to do any harm because the second multi-stage malware payload was never effectively delivered. But subsequent reports by both Avast and Cisco researchers indicate this payload was effectively delivered, with the express goal of gaining access to the servers and networks of at least 18 technology giants, including, places you may have heard of like Intel, Google, Microsoft, Akamai, Samsung, Sony, VMware, HTC, Linksys, D-Link, and of course, Cisco itself. Cisco's researchers say they got a copy of the hacker's command and control server from an unnamed source. That server contained detailed logs of the 700,000 or so computers that had phoned home to the hackers earlier this month. Subsequent investigation has concluded that the hackers didn't really care about most of the infected customers, and that this may have been a sophisticated state-sponsored attack specifically designed to access and copy internal information and trade secrets for major tech firms. Now, we broadcast for you yesterday on the stream the audio of our buddy James Corbett's recent speech in the Netherlands about the echoes of World War I and what we see replaying and happening right now in our rush to World War III. World War III definitely won't look like World War I, and it might look like cyber war. It might look like a giant business operation. It might look like hostile takeovers, all with the technological overlay. So the CCleaner hack may have been worse, and that's pretty much par for the course. Or, again, as is said in the chat, we are soaking in it. It's not easy to host extremist right-wing content on the modern internet. Gab, a small Twitter rival that bills itself as a bastion of free speech, got word from its Australian domain registrar that it has 5 days to find a new registrar or it will be cancelled. Now, this story is now just over more than 5 days. So I don't actually have the update. So while I lay out this story, perhaps someone in the chat will let us know the current status of Gab. The story begins last month when the neo-Nazi site The Daily Stormer got a similar message from its domain registrar, GoDaddy. The editor of The Daily Stormer had written an article mocking Heather Heyer, who died in protest-related violence in Charlottesville. The Daily Stormer wound up losing its domain name, and 2 key people associated with the site, editor Andrew Anglin and webmaster Andrew Arnheimer, switched to Gab as their primary way of communicating with the public. Hosting Anglin and Arnheimer, as well as other right-wing figures like Milo, created headaches for Gab. Days after Anglin became active on Gab, Google kicked Gab out of the Android App Store, citing its lax moderation policy. You can put up pedo-related things on YouTube, don't worry, but don't say gross words that people might not like. A couple weeks later, Anglin mocked Heyer again in a Gab post. Gab's registrar, an Australian company called Instra, threatened to cancel Gab's domain if they didn't delete the post. Gab deleted the post, creating an uproar among their users who, kind of expected the company to take a strong stand for all that shit they blah 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 about. That happens from the top to the bottom. Then on Monday, this is going to be 2 Mondays ago, Instra notified Gab that Gab's content had run afoul of the Australian federal and state anti-discrimination laws, which prohibit public vilification on the basis of race, religion, or ethnic origin. The company gave Gab 5 days. In its post revealing Instra's ultimatum, Gab pointed to an anti-Semitic post by Arnheimer suggesting that a repeat of the '95 Oklahoma City bombing could teach people in power a lesson. Despite its free speech stance, Gab booted Arnheimer from service, arguing the post violated Gab's policies on threats and terrorism. Gab's challenge now will be to find a new registrar willing to host its domain. If the Daily Stormer's experience is any indication, it might not be easy. Stormer cycled through 6 different registrars around the world, with each canceling the site's domain within hours or days of signing up. For the last few days, the site has been unavailable from an Icelandic domain, though it's unclear how long that will last. No, it's been available from an Icelandic domain. Any registrar that accepts Gab's business could face the kind of backlash from anti-racism activists. Is that what you call giant corporate-run thought control? They're anti-racism activists. Okay, fine. When the Stormer signed up to DreamHost's domain register service, DreamHost faced a massive denial of service attack that made a bunch of other DreamHost-hosted sites inaccessible. That's a pretty steep price for any internet business to pay. Gab may be able to convince a domain registrar that hosting racist and anti-Semitic user content, as Gab does, is different from the Daily Stormer publishing its own racist and anti-Semitic content. Given the post-Charlottesville furor over this kind of content, it might be a struggle to find a domain registrar willing to face the backlash. Ars Technica actually has a little correction posted at the bottom of this article from Timothy B. Lee. This story originally stated that the Daily Stormer was available only on Tor, but it's actually online at the aforementioned Icelandic domain. One little brief sidebar is, of course, we're soaking in all of it and looking at all of the news and media and information all around the world. I ran into the part about Heather Heyer is not exactly the photo that we all see in much like a Trayvon kind of way. They show this, oh, he's a cute little 8-year-old kid. It's like, no, he is a giant, 16-year-old dude who got suspended for fights and marijuana just that last week. And this picture of Heather Heyer makes her look like she's just some young, little, beautiful, flowing treasure. And then you see pictures from the scene, and it kind of looks like she was very gigantic and very not healthy. It's not victim blaming by any fucking stretch of the imagination, but just think about the ways that stories are sold to you. They're sold on an emotional level. They need you to react that way, because they can get you when you react violently. It's kind of what I was thinking when I was talking about the guy getting sentenced here in Portland for throwing a flare into a cop car. They know how to respond to that kind of stuff. They've got pretty sweet standard operating procedures to deal with you when you get uppity and violent. They don't really know what to do when you don't take part in their system at all. That leaves them reeling. You are listening to your Morning Monarchy for Tuesday, September 26, 2017. I am James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com, serving up your cyberspace war news. Nielsen Holdings filed a lawsuit last Friday, as was the style at the time, to stop ComScore from using its technology to launch a competing service for measuring television audiences. You've heard of Nielsen before. In a complaint filed with the U.S. District Court in Manhattan, Nielsen seeking an injunction to stop the launch of ComScore's extended TV service, which it said would incorporate its proprietary portable people meter data. More on PPM in just a second. ComScore declined to comment on the lawsuit, saying the matter was being addressed through binding arbitration. Yeah, if you're into that kind of kinky stuff. The dispute arose from Nielsen's 2013 purchase of Arbitron. Arbitron was always the radio ratings thing. Nielsen was always the TV ratings thing. TV ratings company bought the radio ratings company, and now they're just the ratings company called Nielsen Holdings. So the dispute arose from Nielsen's 2013 purchase of Arbitron, which was completed after those companies promised federal regulators to preserve competition for cross-platform services measuring both television and online viewership. Nielsen, based in New York, said it contracted in 2014 to let its Reston, Virginia-based rival use portable people meter data to measure both TV and online audiences. But it said that without that, the contract forbade using the data for individual standalone services, which it said includes extended TV. So basically, they were going to license out their good stuff to somebody else, and they're like, "Whoa, no, wait, screw you. You're going to use our thing to beat us." Nielsen said it had several large contracts up for renewal and would suffer irreparable harm to its business through the loss of important customers and decreased market share if ComScore launched extended TV, perhaps by the end of 2017. According to the complaint, Nielsen filed for arbitration as required by the contract to establish ComScore's alleged breach, but is entitled to seek a court-ordered injunction before the arbitration is resolved. In an August 8th letter attached to the complaint, a lawyer for ComScore said extended TV qualifies as a cross-platform service and is not limited to linear TV estimates, as it measures content across multiple platforms, including but not limited to television, online, mobile, tablets, etc. To be really specific, the case is Nielsen Holdings PLC versus ComScore Incorporated, U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York, number 17-07235. So you can look that up, and you could follow the case on all, of course, the law websites. Now, another interesting story, again, that's submitted to us by our friend Nicole, and again, all our stories are brought to you by you using hashtag cyberspace, where each day of the week has its appropriate hashtag for that day's subject. You can find all that information on the website. Nielsen sues ComScore to block new TV rating service because they would be using PPM. Now, PPM was one of the first things I really learned new when I went to the commercial radio job. And you know, you've been at lots of jobs before, and you're supposed to be there. You know what you're doing, but there's maybe lots of things that's over your head. You don't know all the jargon. You don't know all the words, and you might not know all the history of who used to be there and that program director, and they're gone, and Dennis was great, and blah, blah, blah. I always heard them talking about PPM. Oh, we got to get the PPM. You got to get the PPM. So I'll include the link just to Wikipedia. Portable People Meter, PPM, is a system developed by Arbitron, now Nielsen Audio, to measure how many people are exposed or listening to individual radio stations and televisions, including cable television. The PPM is worn like a pager. It looks exactly like a beeper, and detects hidden audio tones within a station or network's audio stream, logging each time it finds such a signal. Although the makers of PPM claim that it's more accurate than traditional alternatives like handwritten logs or wired meters, critics have raised issues about its accuracy. Another sales argument is that the device is immune to human forgetfulness, something that can be an issue in studies that rely on self-reporting by test subjects. Oh yeah, I totally watched that show. Several parts of the PPM system: an encoder that inserts the tones subliminally into a station's or broadcast network's air chain via psychoacoustic masking. And that was what I figured out while I was there. Part of my job at the end of ground zero, at the end of the night, was to basically open this program that just had all of the station's audio, everything that went over the air for the previous 7 days. So you could scroll back and go grab some clip that happened last Tuesday. Now, if that next Tuesday goes by, it's like, oh shit, you lost your last Tuesday. So you lost your chance to go back and get that show. What I would do at the end of every night, of the end of ground zero, would open up that program and I would pull that night's show. I would go through and mark in, mark out, and cut out all the commercials and pull the entire 5 hours of broadcast, which of course when you chop out all the commercials, it's just over 3 hours. But I always had to make sure I used the PPM version. Do you want the PPM version or the not PPM version? You got to use the PPM version because that adds this weird fairy dust that only now, years later, I realized, oh, it's embedded subliminally. It is psychoacoustic masking, and it is happening on every radio and television broadcast now. Like we've been saying a lot, we are soaking in it. Psychoacoustic masking. That's a buzzword. You know what other terrible buzzwords are? AI. In hacker circles, the Internet of Things is often this object of derision. Do we really need an IoT toaster? But there's one phrase that, while not new, is really starting to annoy in its current incarnation: AI, or artificial intelligence. This article on Hackaday gets into the problem isn't the phrase itself. It's used to mean a collection, or rather it used to mean a collection of techniques used to make a computer look like it was smart enough to, like, play a game or hold a simulated conversation. Of course, in the movies, it means HAL 9000, but lately, though, companies have been overselling the concept, and otherwise normal people are taking the bait. They call it the Alexa effect. Now, some people, of course, as we have noted, are worried about artificial intelligence and AI. And in some ways, they either seem like really cool inventors or bizarre supervillains.
It's gaining momentum. If it does roll out successfully in California, do you see other applications around the world?
The only thing that I'm involved in actually with respect to Hyperloop is we're building a little test track, and we're funding an annual student competition, which is really just to encourage thinking in new modes of transportation.
Yeah, okay, that's Elon talking about rolling out, of course, the kind of taxis and things that we're talking about on this episode. He's into all that stuff, but he's really worried about artificial intelligence. Yeah, open the refrigerator door, Hal. I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid you're too fat for that. Who are you calling a Luddite? Our love-hate relationship with technology, a fascinating comic strip. Out of the ABC in Australia, from the steam engine to the smartphone, technology has always changed our lives, but do you ever feel like you have no say? Meet the real Luddites. This is Nick Ludd, year 2017. Hey Siri, I'm bored. This is Ned Ludd. Good day. He's in 1813. He makes stockings for a living. Nick can't find a job. They say most of the jobs have gone offshore, but she reckons they're being done by robots. Ned is having some feelings about his craftsmanship being made redundant. New machines are pushing him and his friends out of work, and he's worried his family will go hungry. Nick feels a low, quiet rage in the upper left of her belly. Her crush hasn't texted her back, but has posted several times on social media. It's illegal for workers to gather together in a group to discuss their working conditions, but Ned and his friends are angry, and the textile factory owners refuse to negotiate. Ned knows in his spleen that the sledgehammer won't hold off the Industrial Revolution, but his pride makes the hammer swing as much as his arms. He destroys the machines that have taken his job. Nick picks up her phone, which now contains the entire contents of her old desk. She reads about the stars that sit above her roof. Ned is being arrested for his part in what's now being called the Luddite Uprising. Nick feels like she has a stone in her shoe. Maybe it's just a pixel, though. She can't see it, no matter how hard she shakes the boot. Ned is deported to the prison island of Van Diemen's Land. There's a tiny dormant node in his brain that knows one day his surname will become an insult. Some of Ned's friends are publicly hanged. The whole village turns out to see. Nick takes selfies trying on clothes she can't afford to buy. She watches the likes roll in. Trying not to attach herself too much to their meeting, her brother ribs her. You're vain. He's off social media for some peace of mind. Well, you're Luddite. Come on, that's a lazy word. Ned and his partner Elizabeth have a baby. That baby will have a baby. Who will have a baby? Who will have a baby? Who will be Nick? Even though they're made of the same gunk, neither Nick nor Ned has any idea the other existed. Life on Earth's funny like that. Is there an app that could change that? What would Nick have done with that sledgehammer? You can't smash the data in the cloud. And technology is more of an idea than a thing anyway. Would Nick have shown Ned how you can call anyone in the world for free and see their face and hear their voice? What would Ned have made of sex robots? A cure for loneliness or a sign of alienation? Would he have thought of smashing them with a sledgehammer? Was violence necessary? Does Nick feel an echo of Ned when she puts her foot through a cheap pair of socks? Would Ned have boycotted Uber? would Ned have tried to crawl inside that phone? Does time progress in a straight line along a y-axis, or does it fold back on itself and then sometimes disappear completely? The original Luddites fought for their survival in a changing world. Today, we all share their struggle as we embrace and resist new forms of technology. Does that make us all Luddites? Nick Luddite doesn't exist, but the Luddite rebels definitely did, and some of their descendants live in Australia. That's a really fascinating, long-scrolling, essentially comic piece, created by Sam Wallman, Natasha Mitchell, Rosanna Ryan, and Colin Gourlay. That might make it to some of our album arts. Actually, Ned trying to crawl inside of that phone might be a little bit of a better bit of artwork than flying Arabs. Last couple of stories here on your Cyberspace War Morning Show will transition us into food, health, and environment news that we always talk about on Wednesdays. Puerto Rico, of course, suffering unimaginable scale in the wake of Hurricane Maria. Many have been displaced from their homes, and the entire territory might go without electricity and reliable communication for months. While the human tragedy is clearly the most important concern, it's also having a terrible effect on the scientific community. Researchers have learned that the Arecibo Observatory and its signature radio telescope took significant damage when the hurricane passed over. All staff members are thankfully safe for now, but an atmospheric radar line feed and a 39-foot dish used for very long baseline interferometry were lost in winds that reached up to 155 miles an hour. The gigantic central disk is intact, the dish, although the line feeds collapsed, punctured in places. To make matters worse, the situation is dire for on-site staff. The National Science Foundation understands the team members have generators, a water well with food for a week, but the roads are probably going to be impassable for days. Hurricane Maria wreaks havoc on the Arecibo radio telescope. And another one from ABC asking the musical question, what future-proof jobs can you train for now that won't be threatened by the rise of robots? We don't have time to dive all into that. We'll just give you our buddy Head's advice, Sexbot Brothel Swamper. And finally, our last Cyberspace War story that perfectly transitions us into Food World Order. A UK supermarket has become the first in the world to let sucker shoppers pay for groceries using just the veins in their fingertips.
FingerPay is a new way of paying. You can pay just with your finger, no need for card, no need to carry cash, no need to even have a phone. So it works in an environment like this in a university. We don't want to have the hassle of carrying a wallet. You can just pay with your finger.
Customers at the Cost Cutter store at Brunel University in London can now pay using the unique vein pattern to identify themselves.
So you're making sure that
the firm behind the technology.
In the last 2 years,
I think
I've lost about 3 or 4 cards, broken 2.
Walking around, you don't want to carry like purses and phones and all that kind of stuff. It's easy if you can just go like that rather than rummaging through your bag.
Yeah, I mean, Hillary had all that trouble with, she's got to carry like 2 devices? What am I, a caveman? The firm behind the technology, Staller, has said is in serious talks with other major UK supermarkets to adopt high-tech finger vein scanners at pay points across thousands of stores. Remember what we were talking about? They don't want to sell you phones. They want your biometrics. British supermarket offers finger vein payment in worldwide first, and as we called it in the opening description of this episode, giving them the FingerPay. As the vein of the beast rises, all of those stories fall under hashtag Cyberspace War. And again, we only pick about a dozen stories to talk about on these episodes. There are so many other stories. If Cyberspace War is your thing, I think you'd be pretty damn up to date if you followed that news feed. We are independent, non-commercial, alternative news brought to you by you. Now, I didn't mention it yesterday when we played music from Portland's Reverberations, but I've actually got all new Portland music all this week as your songs of the day. Got brand new music from Wild Ones coming up in a couple of days, but today we've got more new music from Braun, an electronic producer who actually just debuted some music on OPB the other day. His record is coming up in just a few weeks, and we'll tell you more about that after this day in history. September 26, 1687. The Parthenon in Athens is partially destroyed by an explosion caused by the bombing from Venetian forces who were besieging the Ottoman Turks stationed in Athens. That's our oldest This Day in History note as we jump then to the 20th century. September 26, 1905, Albert Einstein publishes his first paper on the special theory of relativity. 1914, the United States Federal Trade Commission, FTC, is established by the Federal Trade Commission Act. 1933, as gangster Machine Gun Kelly surrenders to the FBI, shouts, "Don't shoot, G-men!" which becomes a nickname for FBI agents. 1950, United Nations troops recapture Seoul from North Korean forces. Past is prologue. That's this day in 1950. September 26, 1959, Typhoon Vera, the strongest typhoon to hit Japan in recorded history, makes landfall, killing nearly 5,000 people. 1960, in Chicago on this day, the first televised presidential selection debate takes place between Richard Milhous Nixon and John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The old story goes that anybody that listened to it on the radio said, "Oh, Nixon, he totally won," but anyone who watches it on TV says, "Oh, that Kennedy, he won." September 26, 1969, Abbey Road, the last album recorded by the Beatles, is released. It's the last album they recorded, but they released it before... What's the last one? Oh, now it escapes me. Is it Let It Be? I won't get into that. September 26, 1970, Tamla Motown Records announced that the Jackson 5 had sold 10 million singles worldwide in 9 months. Yeah, it is Let It Be. September 26, 1974, Walls and Bridges, released by John Lennon. He wouldn't release any new material until 6 years later in 1980 with what was essentially turned into his posthumous album. September 26, 1975, a little movie called The Rocky Horror Picture Show opened in theaters today. 1981, Nolan Ryan throws his 5th no-hitter, setting records. And another amazing bit of synchronicity that we find ourselves swimming in on these episodes. September 26th, 1983, the late military officer Stanislav Petrov identifies a report of an incoming nuclear missile as a computer error and not an American first strike.
For decades, men in bunkers watched their screens and warning lights every hour of every day, waiting for the Cold War to go nuclear. So too was the situation just after midnight on September the 26th, 1983. Stanislav Petrov was the lieutenant colonel in charge of the Soviet Union's early warning radar system in a bunker near Moscow. Then, it happened.
When I first saw the alert message, I got up from my chair. All my subordinates were confused. So I started shouting orders at them to avoid panic. I knew my decision would have a lot of consequences.
The radar was showing a single missile inbound from the United States. Now the race was on. Was it real or a computer error? His boss accepted over the phone it was a likely fault. But as soon as he hung up...
The siren went off for a second time. Giant blood-red letters appeared on our main screen, saying "Start." It said that 4 more missiles had been launched.
To Petrov, it didn't add up. Any attack by the US would have been all out to try and cripple a Soviet response. But if they were real, he had only 30 minutes to tell his superiors before the warheads hit.
My cozy armchair felt like a red-hot frying pan, and my legs went limp. I felt like I couldn't even stand up. That's how nervous I was when I was taking this decision.
Petrov stuck to his decision, broke Soviet military rules by not telling his superiors, and was proved right. There were no missiles. He never had the authority to press the button himself, but how close had the world come to nuclear war?
At that time it seemed that our country was surrounded by enemies, but was strong enough to retaliate. The Soviet Union and the USA were too strong, and both our countries had too many conflicts of interest in various parts of the world.
For Petrov, the answer is more simple.
We've never been as close to a nuclear war, neither before nor later on. It was the very climax.
Petrov broke military doctrine, but possibly saved the world. He has since been given an award by the Association of World Citizens and honoured by the UN. He says he's not a hero and was just doing his job. Stanislav now lives a quiet life in this block of flats northeast of Moscow. But although he says what happened that night in 1983 is just a footnote, it may turn out to be the most important footnote of Cold War history.
We just talked about Stanislav Petrov. This morning as I was prepping the show, I was like, God, that name's super familiar. Weren't we just talking about him? And indeed, we were just talking about Stanislav Petrov. He died on May 19th from hypostatic pneumonia, but it was not widely reported until now, until last week. R.I.P. Stanislav Petrov. Thanks for doing your part to help avoid friggin' World War III. We might need you again. Continuing to look at this day in history, September 26th, same day, 1983, Australia 2 wins the America's Cup, ending the New York Yacht Club's 132-year domination of the race. In 1984, the UK and China agree a transfer of sovereignty over Hong Kong to take place in 1997. That same day, in 1984, Prince's Purple Rain song was released this day. 97. An earthquake strikes the Italian regions of Umbria and the Marche, causing part of the Basilica of St. Francis at Assisi to collapse. September 26, 1998, MTV Russia debuted at midnight. The first video shown on the network, of course, Moomy Trolls Vladivostok 2000. On this day in 2000, anti-globalization protests in Prague, some 20,000 protesters, of course, turned violent during the IMF and World Bank summits, as they know how to deal with violence. On this day in 2005, the PBS Kids channel is shut down and replaced by a joint network with Comcast called Sprout. Published to Media Monarchy, my own website, a decade ago today. 3 stories for you. Violent crackdown launched in Myanmar. Security forces in Myanmar opened fire on demonstrators, and witnesses said police beat and dragged away dozens of Buddhist monks. You see the CFR talking a little bit about Myanmar these days? Yes, you do. Look at our hashtag listening to the enemy. Cheney mauled Israeli strike on Iran. From Reuters, Vice President Dick Cheney had at one point considered asking Israel to launch limited missile strikes at an Iranian nuclear site to provoke a retaliation. And finally published to Media Monarchy a decade ago today, The Drug Nexus, How the War on Drugs Brought Communism to America. And celebrating birthdays on September 26th, he's a real dude. Johnny Appleseed, probably not his real last name, but he was an American gardener and environmentalist born on this day in 1774, and I will repeat my call for a modern-day Johnny Hempleseed. It's also T.S. Eliot's birthday, Martin Heidegger, George Gershwin, George Raft, Jack LaLanne, Marty Robbins, Julie London, film producer Jerry Weintraub, former Arizona Governor Jan Brewer, English singer-songwriter Brian Ferry, born on this day in 1945, Andrea Dworkin, and Christine Todd, The Air is Safe to Breathe at Ground Zero Whitman, born on this day in 1946. It's also Olivia Newton-John's birthday, Carlene Carter, the amazing Linda Hamilton, the troubled dead Darby Crash, one of the Kagan crime families, Robert Kagan, born on this day. It's also Al Petrelli, guitarist for Trans-Siberian Orchestra and Alice Cooper, Tracy Thorne from Everything But the Girl, John Tempesta, drummer for The Cult and White Zombie, the late great Shannon Hoon from Blind Melon. It's also Jesus' birthday, Jim Caviezel, and, speaking of White Zombie, Sherry Moon Zombie. All those folks celebrating birthdays today. 1 or 2 of them might make their way into our daily DJ set at noon that we call Pump Up the Volume. That's just one of the 2 awesome shows you get every day from Media Monarchy, as we will wet that whistle and go out with music from Braun, Portland electronic producer. We got the title track from his upcoming record, Silent Science, and it comes out on October 6th. And again, everything we say and play, all the stuff, all the clips, all the bits, all included in the show notes. And it's thanks to you. There's your Cyberspace War Tech Tuesday edition of your Morning Monarchy for September 26, 2017, and I am still James Evan Pilato, still thanking you so very much for listening and taking part, and reminding you, as always, like Jello Biafra of the Dead Kennedy said, don't hate the media, become the media. Take care.
You're listening to Media Monarchy with James Evan Pilato. Since 2005, Media Monarchy has covered the real news about politics, health, technology and the occult, all remixed with music and media that matters. Go to MediaMonarchy.com/support and become a monthly subscriber so you can help keep independent, non-commercial, alternative media going and growing. Thanks.